Hi everyone, to another IoT developer event. Today I have Ruben Miller with me. He is the product manager of Synedge, but he's also the main contributor and inventor of an amazing tool called go-c8y-cli, which we will introduce and give you some updates in this meeting. As you might always know, in this kind of events, all the microphones and cameras for the participants are muted. You will have the chance in the end of the event to ask your questions. And as always, in the meanwhile, if you have upcoming question to a specific topic, use the chat. I think others or even Ruben or myself will try to answer them during the meeting, but also in the end, if it's not answered, we will read them out and Ruben try to answer them. The meeting will be recorded and I will upload the recording later on to YouTube so everybody can see the recording later on. Also, of course, we will share after the meeting some references and links and the GitHub repository to the tool. Now it's all yours, Ruben. Stage is yours.
Thanks. Okay, so let me share. Okay, so welcome everyone. So I wanted to use this time to basically give a short update. So this is not the first presentation I've done for go-c8y-cli, but I wanted to kind of, explain what we've been doing recently with it, maybe some of the new features, but also for those people who don't know it, to also give a bit of an introduction to kind of, to tell you how to use it roughly and kind of where to go from there. So as Sheldon said, I'm the creator of go-c8y-cli. I agree it's a bit of a mouthful. I've had several comments about that. But the name was basically chosen to not conflict with the NPM project c8y-cli. So I figured I would have some kind of different name, and I'm not very creative in naming, so go-c8y-cli it was. So what is it for a tool? So it's a CLI tool, obviously, which then interacts with the Cumulocity IoT API. So without the very strong API and like the stableness of the Cumulocity API, so the REST API I'm talking about, this tool wouldn't even be possible. But it's really about implementing the best practices to interact with the API, but also to make it very convenient so you can do some very powerful things very, very easily. So because it was basically created out of a use that I had. So I think I've been using for Cumulocity for about 7 years now. And that was also for about 3 years prior to Software AG. So I was using it as a customer, and I kind of saw the gap that I was basically a power admin for a platform, and then I had to do a lot of daily tasks. And I kind of got the limit to using Postman pretty quick. And I needed to kind of have tools to automate systems, do debugging or whatever. And so I saw the gap and I figured over time it's kind of developed. So this tool is actually quite old now. There's been a few different variants of it. But I had the version 2 release about 2 years ago, and that was a major change because that kind of introduced more compatibility with Mac OS, Linux, Windows, and it kind of moved away from just being a PowerShell tool to being really a pure binary, which you can really run anywhere. So for documentation, because I hate doing PowerPoints, I've just created a blog page. So this blog page will also be available on the documentation website. So I'll run through that a bit later. So I'll just kind of go through a little bit of the content, but I won't read everything because you can always catch up with it later. So what are the main kind of use cases? So I'm gathering we have probably a mix of people in the call at the moment. So anyone from like tenant admins, which have to do like the automatic configuration of new tenants. So, creating subtenants, creating users, maybe configuring retention rules, setting tenant options, or just reading what the system options are so you can kind of talk to the cloud team or whatever. So the whole kind of setup. You have a bit of like API discovery. So especially when you're starting fresh with Cumulocity, you don't really know what's on offer. So you can kind of peruse the OpenAPI spec and have a bit of a look, and that's very informative. But it can be sometimes a little bit abstract. So for example, there's no devices concept, or the API is really manage objects in the end. So I try to kind of put all of this into context of the user. So I just want to get a list of devices. It's called devices list. So it's good for API discovery because you can kind of view it in the context and then translate that and have a look under the hood and then say, that's this API call, and then you can check out the documentation. So it's a very good kind of lead-in tool. Then a big one, which it's my go-to tool for basically everything, is troubleshooting. So it's troubleshooting in different kind of variations as well. So either during local development, when you're developing new tools, trying to troubleshoot your new microservice that you're running locally, something that's generating data in the wrong format or whatever. It's easy to kind of view the data there and then fix things, but also doing root cause analysis. So in production, being sure why did something happen, how did it, and when did it happen, seeing correlation between events, between multiple devices, collecting log files across 1,000 devices. That's pretty much impossible any other way, or very difficult, and you have to kind of develop a microservice, which I know a lot of people do. But this is basically delivering kind of one-liners everywhere. And then also like simulation and rapid prototyping. So especially, I know a lot of people from the pre-sales use it to generate a customer-like environment to better kind of communicate what Cumulocity is and what can it do in a very, very quick manner, and generate kind of randomized data. So it's not all like the same name. So having that kind of randomness mixed in there as well can also help then sell it to customers, or just communicate your idea better and efficiently. And the big one, which is kind of starting to pick up a little bit more adopters, is using it in your CI/CD pipeline. So whether it's deploying microservices or web applications, to actually like doing some kind of device cleanup, because maybe after you have your test run, your test devices are still there and you want to kind of delete them afterwards, or remove the device certificates. I know that's kind of a big one, given the context of ThinEdge. So it's very easy to kind of then look at what certificates there and just delete all of them. And then one thing I know in some other projects, that reporting, so I don't mean the cockpit reporting, I mean kind of these ad hoc reports where you need to kind of generate a rich report, which is basically maybe how many measurements in the last hour were created from this device, but across a cross-section of devices. And then maybe some very business specific kind of metrics and doing some correlation in between them. So you can kind of say, how good are we going? And maybe feed that back into development saying, we're having less measurements now, we need to do something or whatever. It can be good for that kind of snapshot reporting kind of style. It's not meant to replace any kind of, Grafana kind of setup, but it can just be a good complementary tool. So before I go into kind of like the basics, for the people that do know something about it, I wanted to maybe highlight some nice new features that have been included. So the biggest and best feature by far is the support for extensions. So that's basically, it's an easy way to share new commands and also extend the existing commands based on your requirements. So you can do this dynamically, so you don't have to recompile anything. This is really like either scripts or a YAML-based kind of setup. You can actually then extend go-c8y-cli to actually then include your own commands and do whatever kind of task that you want. And then you can share it within the team using a Git repository, and everyone can kind of pull it in very, very easily. Since that's such a huge feature, I won't really show it today. We'll have a separate session on this because it's really looking at how you can use it in your daily life, also to represent or interact with microservices. If you develop a microservice, you can kind of create bindings to go-c8y-cli very, very easily. Then some of the other features like progress bars for binary uploads and downloads. So if you're doing like large file downloads, you can kind of get a progress bar on the console. Interfacing with the notifications to API. I also have a nice tutorial, which is very, very easy. You can, I think, get a whole subscriber and consumer happening in 3 lines, which is really convenient to play around and going, how can I utilize that in my applications? Then we have the output templates. So those not familiar, I've used JSONet for a while to do kind of randomized data generation in the creation of the body. But now I've kind of enabled it for controlling and shaping your data output. So once you get the response from the server, you can actually shape it by using a template and then combine maybe the request with the response. So group it into one object or do some kind of manipulation there. That will kind of be showed out in some of the examples later. And a few kind of smaller ones like additional template functions that are available in JSONet, like date manipulation to do relative date kind of arithmetic. CSV utilities, so if a customer gives you a CSV file, that there's utilities to read that directly and then pump out measurements from that. And also stuff relating to the Data Hub API. So you can actually do a report via the command line to actually then get the output and get a 50,000 row output very conveniently from the command line. So obviously, if you have a tool, if you can't install it or if it's not very easy to install, then it's kind of useless. So I try to cater for a lot of different scenarios. So I would say my preferred way is shell if you can. So that's whether natively on Mac OS or Ubuntu, Debian, or whatever. You can also run it on Windows. If you're running on Windows, I recommend WSL. But those for Docker inclined can do that. My personal view is Docker is not so useful if you want to have persistence, because working with volumes on your host operating system, especially in the world of Docker desktop, is not so straightforward these days. So if you can, do the shell, but you can resort to Docker if you need to. And then PowerShell, there is a binding there, but it's not just for PowerShell. It's basically a package delivery mechanism. And then if everything else fails, it's just a single binary. So in the end, you can go to the GitHub release page and download it. Easy. And to clarify a few kind of misconceptions, because I've heard this every now and then. So the biggest one is it relies on PowerShell. No. It hasn't since June 2021, so over 2 years. So yes, it did start off in there because I was, and a lot of the design principles are actually heavily influenced from PowerShell, but it's now a pure binary, so it's very, very Linux friendly, and I actually use it only in Linux these days. Then the second one would be, how does it compare to Postman? And it's just like Postman on the command line. No, it goes beyond Postman very, very quickly. Because it's all about, in Postman, you send a request and then you get something back. And then you copy and paste and then use that in another request and you open a new tab. So I'd kind of like ask the question, how many tabs do you have open in your Postman window at the moment? And I gather everyone says something about 20 or larger than 20. That's just becomes super unmaintainable, and you can't kind of link things, and it shows this lack of linking responses to the follow-up requests. Yes, you can do scripting in JavaScript there, but that doesn't do this kind of nice shell pipeline stuff. So hopefully with the demo stuff, I'll be able to highlight that a little bit more. Okay, so let's actually start doing something now. So I want to show the basics. So getting around, doing sessions and stuff. So the very first thing that you have to do is, because we're talking about communicating with the Cumulocity API, we need to then, say what Cumulocity API do you want to talk to. So I have something called sessions. So a session is basically the credentials that you need to then connect to Cumulocity. So using the REST authentication or authorization header, so whether it be bearer or username password or whatever, you can use it for all the follow-up requests. So normally you would then, to create a session, so there's a sessions kind of subcommand, and then we can just go, well, we want to create a session, and it will prompt me for all of the information. So I'm just going to do a example one here. Ruben, test me. And now ask me, what kind of mode do I want to work with? Because when we're talking about a CLI, you want to interact with different, or like you're interacting with different Cumulocity clients in different kind of scenarios. So do not just blindly accept dev, because this is basically no restrictions. It's kind of like sudo, running in a sudo console. You usually don't do it. You can, but you should only do it in development mode, because it really means you can delete anything, you can create anything, update, whatever, no restrictions. For production, always use the production mode, because it really disables all of the dangerous commands. So it would just basically go in read-only mode. So protect you from dumb mistakes. And the QA is kind of somewhere in between, that allows you to update stuff, but doesn't allow you to delete stuff. You can kind of change modes within the thing, but you should set the baseline with what kind of environment you're kind of doing. So I know I'm in a dev environment, so I know we'll be creating a lot of devices, deleting them, starting again, creating them again, deleting them, and whatever. So I kind of want to be freedom. So I'd go no restrictions, and then that's created my profile, or sorry, the session. So the session is just a JSON file. So if I just cat that, you can see here, it just has a bit of information about it, what the host name is. There's a schema involved here to help you kind of know what you can set. So if you're in like VS Code, it kind of can interpret that. It stored my password here. So at the moment, because I haven't used the encryption option, so it's showing me as plain text, but there is an encryption option. And then if I had a token, it would also show the token there as well. So once you have created the session, you need to activate it, because it's just really creating this kind of JSON file. So we can use the set session helper. So I'm just going to go to my kind of normal setup and kind of select, so you can see what file it is, what host, username is configured. So this is the one that I'm going to use. So because I have encryption on, I can actually safely do this. So you can see when I set the runner, or like set my session, it's kind of indicated, I'm using a passphrase, yes, so it's unencrypted it when it's kind of read the session. And it gives me a bit of information about it. So this is also new, showing what version you're talking to. At the moment, I have it a bit on hide sensitive information mode. So that's why the host is kind of obfuscated at the moment, and the tenant username. But that's okay, because I'm not exposing anything here. But it's usually when you're not doing this, is what I do for demos, just to kind of, not show everything immediately. So you can then kind of see what kind of context you're in. And I can see all of my details there. So now that I have a session, I can actually start doing stuff. So for example, get a list of devices. So I can see here that everything's shown, that I have 5 devices at the moment. But you might notice kind of the setup of the commands, that it's kind of, the verb is always last, because that's kind of, I've structured everything like a tree. So because the API is so broad, there kind of needs to be a way to navigate through that. And you kind of know, I know I want to do something with a device, but I don't know what can I do with the device. So that's why I've kind of done it this way. So you can kind of go, well, what do I have first? And if I want to do something with devices, I can then see, okay, I can create, I can delete, get, etc. So there's a lot of options there. So if I just go list again, and that's a command. So all of the commands follow this kind of pattern. It can go to 3 or 4 nested, depending what it is, because the more complex you get, the more kind of need that you need to kind of categorize things. But that's basically the shape of it. And you can see here, I'm heavily using command completion. So that plays a big role, and a big role with the user experience. So if you don't have command completion, just navigating all these commands is just near impossible. I would suggest using Z shell because that has a really nice completion mechanism compared to Bash. Bash is a little bit ordinary, to be honest. So if you can, try to install Z shell, and then you can get this really rich and kind of a list-based kind of tab completion with the command and then also the description. That also goes down to tab completion of actual arguments. So if the flag that I want to get an ID, I can actually kind of tab through the devices that I have available, and then that gets this device. And this is actually doing a bit of magic, reference by name. I won't go into that because we can read that online. But it gives you everything's very basically tab completion. So if in doubt, use tab completion. So not only sometimes you reach a limit of like tab completion. Sometimes you need to go, well, other examples or what's the help like? So all of the commands obviously have a help. I'm trying to, yeah, let's go here. So you can either have the full-blown help, which is a little bit verbose because there's a lot of global flags for different kind of use cases and everything. So to kind of weed out some of the noise, you could either pipe that to more, hear that, or there's a convenience function that says, I'm pretty good at interpreting examples, so just show me the examples and I can extrapolate. So usually examples are pretty straightforward, so it guides you what you want to do. And if people have common use cases, I usually kind of add them to the examples then. So you can do kind of a lot of things that check the examples first and then kind of go, that's actually my use case, and then I can copy paste. Get all the devices which were registered no longer than 7 days ago, or longer than 7 days ago. And the inverse, registered in the last day, etc. So there's a few good examples there. Then you might notice that the output is also kind of tabular at the moment. So this is because I'm actually using, or when you're writing to the console, so this is kind of like a TTY, it's called, it assumes a human is reading it. So human tab, like a table form, is a bit easier to read rather than JSON, and it's more compact. It doesn't show you all the information. It says, well, you have limited space. I'm going to adapt to the space that you have and kind of show you as much as I can. But obviously, if I make it a bit wider, which I will now, I get more kind of information. But you can actually control that by the formats by using kind of different kind of outputs. So again, tab completion. So you can choose from CSV, JSON, server response, table, or a new one is also TSV, so tab delimited. And you can kind of control it how you want. So it's very flexible. And the key to that is also how does it play with other kind of tooling? So for example, if I wanted to do that to cut and then I want the second field, obviously that didn't work very well. You can kind of then limit it to, or CSV, that's a very better one. So, okay, I'm looking at something different. Okay, I think, yeah, I'll get into that later. So the idea is to kind of like control, if I did this, it would actually work. 5 demos. So I could actually get the name of it. It's a bit of a gotcha, I guess. So I basically said from the output, I want ID and name. So only ID and name. And then I'm just going to use cut to say I want the second field using a comma delimiter. So the output is just a little bit dynamic because generally if you pipe to something, you get all of the data, and that's probably not in the original alert that you're thinking. But that's a detailed discussion for another time. So using the kind of outputs, you can kind of shape and be compatible with all the different kind of tooling that's available, because a big part of it is also being compatible with all of this additional tooling and not just, staying in the world of go-c8y-cli. So now so you can kind of read the other kind of stuff like template generation. There's a great concepts page for that. But I will show the website and they'll be posted later. So all of this information is available here, and you can look at the concepts where you can really go into, what is templates and how to use them, why they're useful, a lot of kind of use cases there. So I'll just jump over that stuff now and then move on to a few more of kind of like the explicit use cases, which are a little bit more interesting. So I'll try to put it in categories. So here, this is kind of a part of exploring your data. So during development, let's say that you have a whole host of devices and you kind of want to know, well, how many unique device types do I have and how many counts of each device type do I have across my fleet? So I can first check how many devices do I have. So I'm going to use a newer feature, I think since 10.16, that total elements or with total elements. And there I get a whole count that I have 5,329 devices within my current tenant. So here I can happily then use the following command because you'll see to get a unique type, there is no kind of aggregate query at the moment in Cumulocity. So to actually get the summarized counts, you need to get all of the devices, strip the information back, and then use it in, use Unix tools like sort and unique to then get the counts you want. So before you do any of this, and this is why the caution there, always think about how many things am I touching. So here I've done a pre-check. So if we're thinking about 5,000 devices, that's about, with max size of 2,000 page size, that's about 3 requests. So 3 requests, not so bad. It's a lot of information still, but it's still within definitely, I won't harm anything by doing this. So because of the page size, so those that know Cumulocity, you have max page size of 2,000, and then kind of saying, well, I want everything can be a little bit difficult, and you have to kind of do the pagination yourself. So that's why I have include all, which then gets everything. I select the type. I say, well, I just want the output in CSV, but because I'm just getting one type, it's really just going to be like a line delimited file or line delimited output. Then I'm using a combination of sort and unique C, which will get me the unique counts. And then I just sort it in human numeric order to then show how many, so I can see the most common devices at the bottom, and then the least common devices at the top. So just has to do this because my server connection, I'm a little bit far away from the server at the moment. And then here we can see that the main devices that I have in my tenant are actually thin edge devices. So 725 of them. And then we can see that I have some other kind of devices, and then I have some odds kind of randomized devices, most likely. So maybe that leads on to the next one. Well, I've seen something going, well, the select test, that's kind of probably error information, but let's do something more interesting. So this type, I don't recognize this type. So let's just inspect it. So I don't want to get all of them because I just want to sample. So the default page size is okay there. I'm just going to pipe it to JQ so I get an all-inclusive view. I'll view each of the details there. So we can see here that we have a lot of like HR customer tests. So it kind of looks to be, I can see who the owner was, CI user 01. Yeah, I remember I kind of was playing around with kind of randomized generation using templates for someone, but it looks like it's information that I can kind of delete. So how do I delete that? So I'm already half there because I have my initial query that I've already proven, yes, this returns a list of devices. So I'm returning the first 5, but I like to do it incrementally so I don't break anything, which is best practice in production. So if I want to delete these 5 devices, and then I'll show how to delete all of them. This is where using pipelines comes into play. So I can just go devices, delete, and then it stops me. It says, wait a second, delete mode is disabled. This is because my profile is set to qual. So that basically says you can create stuff, but you can't delete stuff. So this is a protection mechanism. So you can actually temporarily enable dev mode. And if I run that again, it'll work. But it's still prompting me. So it's still saying, hey, do you want to delete this? I can either do yes, A for yes to all, because now if I press A, it won't ask me again. We'll just continue going through the list. And so it's deleted the 5 items. So now if I do the count again, total elements, it should be 5 less. I can't remember what the count was before. But yeah, that count comes back. And so now if I want to delete everything, so I've confirmed my methodology. And now I kind of want to go then, okay, I'm going to use include all. Or my kind of preference is always to use, if you're not talking about tens of thousands of devices, it's also questionable if you need to delete tens of thousands of devices, going why. But I kind of know that we had about 42 devices. So I'm just going to go 100. It shouldn't get anything more, but just in case if I do a typo or something, that I'm at least limiting the damage. So it's always good to have this in the back of your mind. But now I actually want to do something a bit fancier. And because I have 42 devices, so I don't want to do it serially. So I'm just going to maybe pick 3 workers. I want to see a progress bar. And what else do I have? And let's just add, because I don't want to overload things, I'm just going to add a delay of 100 milliseconds per worker. After it does the job, it'll wait 100 milliseconds and then continue. And maybe let's make it 200 milliseconds. So it's still prompting me because I haven't used force, but I can just press A and then it'll go, okay, yes, I'm doing my thing. And then the workers just kind of sit there and go through that. You get a nice count here to say how many requests have I done. And that kind of gives you an idea. Okay, 42. Cool, that matched, sanity check, very good. And you can kind of see what the average request per second is per worker to give you a bit of an idea. So I've done jobs like this where it's run for hours because we have to process 100,000 devices to add like a manage object or like a fragment to a manage object. And you want to do that in a production in a very kind of soft manner to not interrupt normal activities, so you can kind of back it off. So having that also start time is useful to kind of then trace, hey, what did I do when? So the progress thing is quite handy, but I think that's also existed in the last year. So I'll go into a few of the other ones, just looking at time. So the exploring the API is a good one. I won't go into much detail, but this is where the dry really comes and is useful. So the dry run doesn't send a request, but it shows you what it will send. So this is a great documentation tool and also using within development. So if you're writing your own microservice and you go through the OpenAPI spec and you're going, well, I kind of know the query, but how do I filter based on time? That is a little bit like on a manage object query. That is a little bit trickier. So you can actually then use the go-c8y-cli to then create the query and just say, well, I don't want to send it. Just tell me what it is. And then you can see it in a very human readable fashion, because this is not URL encoded. Actually, you need to use creation time.date and GE, so greater or equal to, and stuff like that. So you can kind of use it to answer those questions. And before you kind of develop it, you can even run and check out what the response would be. You're going, yeah, that didn't return anything. And then you're going, well, is that expected or not expected? Adjust your query, and then kind of do these iterations and then go back to your microservice. So it mostly shines when you're working with a language which doesn't have an SDK. Obviously, if you're using the Java SDK, it's less useful. However, I think it's still good to understand what's happening under the hood and demystify it. Because I think that's very important when you're kind of learning a new technology and learning a new platform, is kind of understand what the underlying calls are, make sure it's not doing too much. So I'm just going to look at a few kind of advanced troubleshooting ideas. The main focus is just to show kind of how powerful these one-liners can be. So also during development, you're new to the platform and you want to create a device and you want to add an external identity, but you've accidentally done a typo and done like identities or something like that on the API call, and the API calls failed. So you didn't really notice this until a week later. And then suddenly you're going, well, why do I have 20 devices now? So maybe you want to then check how many devices don't have an external identity. So doing this kind of inverse query is the tricky part, because there's no query API for going, hey, tell me that. So here what you can actually use is a combination of like the output templates. So you can still use this pipe nature. So you get a list of devices. Then you can use the identity list to say, well, list all the identities, and then use a specially crafted output template where you can basically look, if the output has a length of 0, that means it hasn't returned any external IDs. Then I just want to return the input. Otherwise, just return an empty string. So it's a bit of a kind of like a Python-esque. So this is basically just JSON, which draws a lot of inspiration from Python. And then by doing this, you can kind of then output and get the inverse list, which is very, very helpful. So there's a lot of kind of like one-liners here. So I can see here, so if I go identity list device, I can see here like it doesn't return any identities because there's none associated to it. So I have a nice list here. Then I can go follow up and go, oh, okay, these devices should be deleted, or I should manually add the identities to them. You can also then pipe that or use that later on in the pipe. So it gives you a lot of flexibility. So a bit of troubleshooting, which is very, very helpful in development because there's inevitably problems that you kind of just need to fix. And you can do the lookups very easily and then also scale them out to production if needed. Along the lines of also kind of inspection. So this is where kind of even, I guess, kind of doing a Postman-like query where you're just saying, well, just show me the raw data there. So there's a few kind of handy aliases available. So one being MO for those who've used Cumulocity, that stands for manage object. So I can, if I have an ID, because sometimes you do have the ID in development, you can just go c8y mo ID, and it will just print out the raw manage object in JSON format because you want to see everything. You don't want a condensed version. You really want to detect when you have maybe schema problems, that maybe you're writing a date in the wrong format, not in the ISO 8601 format or whatever. You can kind of use it to detail and go, okay, I didn't know I added the c8y details object. You can either delete that or whatever. So it's good to kind of like explore the platform. Then looking on one before I do kind of like the main event is a lot in the troubleshooting phase, so more in the root cause analysis. You might get a customer which has a lot of business logic and there's something that fails. So maybe there's the thin edge is running and you've collected the log files, and now you want to collect all of the log files from the devices or like from the uploaded events, and then analyze them locally, and then use grep there to then do some kind of root cause analysis. So you doing this manually would be okay for maybe 2-3 devices because you could download and that's good. But it becomes quite impossible very, very quick. Because if you talk about 100 devices, are you going to go on the website and go do that? It becomes very, very difficult. But with one line, I could actually look for all of the events because I know that these events of this type have a binary associated to them. Then I can just say, well, parse it to c8y events binary and download it. It's printing automatically on the console, so that might not be so useful because you're going, well, I kind of want to store it in different files, so I can use grep across the files. So you can actually do something very, very similar, but storing the output to file and using a template variable. So if I do this now, it's still going to print out to console. But now, if I've looked on the file, these are all the files that were downloaded, and these are the individual names of the files that were uploaded to the platform. I think I added the .txt just for my preference, because I know they're kind of text-based. And then I can then grep all of them as I please. So, and then do kind of analysis from there. So it's very, very powerful for these kind of ad hoc things. You don't know what you need to collect, but you want to collect it fast because the customer's kind of asking you, or you have to react quickly because device is going offline for unknown reasons, and you need to assess and kind of prevent that from getting worse. So I'm going to jump to the main kind of demo that is looking at kind of extended applications. So if we look at the CI/CD kind of setup, so I have kind of two cases where one is I'm just doing something fairly simple, which is like deploying applications. So I can deploy a microservice or a web application. But when you do these things, it's not just the act of deploying it. That's quite easy. And, there's actually other tools that do it. But what happens is, well, every time you upload it, there's another binary related to this microservice or web application. Maybe you want to then clean up the old ones and only keep the last 5. So this is actually easy to do with the one line. So I'll show the workflow shortly. And the second one is doing a bit of device management. So in your CI/CD pipeline, in addition, so you could actually do kind of like GitHub style device management. It uploads some configuration and software to the repository in the device management section. It then takes one of those software, deploys it to a small group of devices, so a canary group. So they're saying, hey, these are the pilot devices. If it works there, it should work everywhere. Deploy to the canary, wait until it's successful, and then deploy based on the pass rate. If it's passed above 90%, I think I said it, then continue and then deploy the same software to the rest of the fleet. So I'm just going to switch to another screen. So here I have all of those kind of workflows roll up into one. You can read a bit of the details and the intricacies here later, and also view the workflow shortly, or in the links provided afterwards. So here, I'm just going to trigger a canary rollout. So, and it also deploys it's kind of like my all IoT bundle all at once. So this is I'm using GitHub. So GitHub Action or GitHub Runner, which uses a go-c8y-cli action now. So when I trigger this, it will then create 2 bulk operations. One bulk operation first, which will then deploy to this one in the bottom left, because this is part of my canary group. And then on the right side is another device, which is part of my main population. So you can kind of think, when I go from here, let's go anti-clockwise here, so watch here. And then in the middle, this will kind of intercept the operation, try to do it, give the feedback back, and then we should see some stuff up here. So I'm just going to trigger that. We can see it all happening in real time, and I hope the real-time stuff is still working. So that's also new, that this setup, so there's a special GitHub action, which then installs go-c8y-cli automatically for you, the latest version, or you can fix it to the version, and it'll print out some details there. So we can already see it's kind of, because it's quite quick, it's already got to the canary phase. If we go down here, so it's trying to install the new version of software in the canary phase. And we can see here it's successful. And then it's automatically going, okay, if everything's good, I then can proceed with the main population. And then we see on the bottom right, so this one's kicked in now for the main population. That's also successful. Hey, job's complete. Everything's green in GitHub. Perfect. My deployment worked well. So you can kind of, to do this, so the main point is just to show the versatility of it. So you can kind of interact with anything from Cumulocity. If it's the API, it's available. And then so you get some nice logging. So it's quite easy to do. So let's just, for demonstration purposes, show what kind of like a failed deployment looks like. So I'm just going to trigger it once more. And I do have a special flag here. And I'm just going to change that. Sorry, I need to do that. So I'm just going to simulate a deployment error. So this time we should see when the bulk operation comes in and triggers an operation down here, we should see that it has set to failed. And you can also see in the description of the operations that we have this traceability. We've set the runner ID into the description, or you can set it to a fragment. And then so everything's really traceable. So you know what triggered what, when did it trigger, and then you can have go back to the runner and see what the output was. So you have that kind of full circle. So it's failed, and then my job will go, oh, your pass rate wasn't successful. So it then doesn't proceed any further because I have a fail fast configured. That's just a workflow thing. And then even on so let's view the output here. So it said the bulk operations success rate is too low to continue. So expected greater than 90%, but it got 0%. And it's also going to analyze the failure reasons for you. And it basically just requests all the operations and views all of the messages. And I can see what the failure reasons going, okay, I need to get some log files. But you could also then trigger maybe the retrieval of those log files based on this kind of thing. So you can do some really, really powerful things to kind of gather all of these kind of things and tie it together to really, make the platform work for you in the end. And it should already be easy to do. So that concludes the demo part. So I think now we can open up for questions, because I think we're in time.
Yeah, I will open the microphones. Just give me a second. Okay, no, our microphones can be unmuted. There were a few questions in the chat, and I tried to answer them already. Mainly about if it's a public tool or it's an internal tool. What else did we have?
It's definitely a public, and it will always be public. I will definitely make that commitment. I'm a big push. There's no point making it private. There's zero benefit for anyone if it's private.
Exactly. There were also the question, what about breaking changes in new Cumulocity APIs with 10.17, for example, there was a breaking change. Is this then maintained? If it's then affecting go-c8y-cli, how do we make sure that this is then implemented in the tooling?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a tricky one. So generally, all of the API is additive, give or take one or two instances. So generally, if there's new features like that with total elements, that was new in 10.16, that's generally, I'm fairly early to adopt things, so I don't mind adding it because it's all a little bit like template-based generation, so it's quite quick to add new things. However, if there's breaking changes, at the moment, there is no smart detection going, you're using 10.17, don't use this. I would open up to using that in the future, or like having a mechanism in the future to maybe possibly dynamically disable things. But if you dynamically disable things, it can become a little bit harder to maintain. However, when you try to do these things and the server doesn't accept it, the server will return an error. So in the end, it could be a bit of a usability problem that, you're going, why am I getting an error? It worked, in this other tenant. But in the end, it's not destructive for the CLI because the server will then reject it if it's no longer valid. But I try to do a bit of compatibility because I know how difficult it is. So I try to make it easy for users. So if there's particular use cases, I have no problem adding those kind of, if it makes sense, adding them into the tool so everyone can benefit from it. Because it's really about nailing these common use cases to make it easier for people to use.
And I also added in the chat that you, in your name, of course, that we are all very open for contribution. And if you detect any issues with the tooling, just create an issue in the GitHub project.
Yeah, exactly. So I even created 2 minor ones today. Corbinian's been a big contributor. Contribution comes in different forms. So creating an issue is a great contribution. It doesn't always just mean writing code, because that helps to shape the product or doing like feature requests. I'm always open. So yeah, don't be shy about adding new things or like, requesting things.
And I also stated that it's very actively maintained. It's not like something that will take half a year or a year until something is maybe implemented, yes. But you are very active on that.
I think if you look at my release history, I've proven for at least the last 3 years, it's quite frequent. And I try not to break anything, so it's mostly additive as well. So if there's new features, so I try not to rename anything, or if I rename something to have an alias for it so it doesn't break, like existing cron jobs, for example.
There's another question, how to use c8y-cli for long-running commands to avoid high CPU usage or avoid expensive queries on Mongo, probably delay?
Yeah, exactly, the delay. So that was exactly for that use case, because if you have this kind of setup, I've done something wrong there. Don't need that. So if I just do something really dumb, right, which is these won't exist, but I can actually then delay the response by 10 seconds. And so it is basically like, how do I back off? It's kind of like rudimentary rate limiting. So yeah, you can definitely, and I would encourage people definitely in production to always use that. You can also set default, like sensible defaults, which are session based. So for example, if I'm using production, I usually then set a default setting. So update setting, defaults, delay, and then it gives a few kind of suggestions. You get, because it's a duration, so you can do like 10 minutes, 10 seconds, 100 milliseconds. So you can actually then, I usually like setting that, and then it's saved within my profile. Oops, and it's probably trying to open something up now. Yeah, so you can kind of do it depending on what your kind of use case is, and then that's saved here. So every time I do any request, it's going to delay. Again, it'll use 500 milliseconds. So that was quite quicker. But yeah, you can kind of control it to your use, especially if you're using workers. And again, controlled concurrency. Don't just think, oh, let's do 1 million requests. It's a client. So you shouldn't just blindly do something because you're impatient. You should always think about, what is the effect? How critical do I need to run this? Am I stopping a critical thing, or do I have time? It's not that important, so I can do longer running tasks. Yeah. So in production, always, if it's not urgent, always back it off.
Okay, thank you. Another question. Is there anything for report generation except using --o CSV header?
In terms of data formats, no. But you can, because if you do at least so JSON line output, that can be a pretty easy format to parse. But at the moment, it's TSV, CSV, and something. I'm open to actually doing different outputs. And I've kind of even thought, how could I make that pluggable a little bit? So whether you have kind of, don't know, the other kind of, more big data kind of outputs or something, but it kind of depends on your use case. Maybe if you're going too far in that direction, that's maybe where you should be using Data Hub instead, because that has nice query and you can query from it and do the heavy lifting there. And I think you can actually control what kind of output. So it's more like column-based data rather than JSON, which is a little bit more efficient to read. But I'm open to that. If there's a light way to add that in, yeah, and it would be useful, sure.
Okay. Just another question by Michael. If I use notification to API for measurement events alarms and start the watching, maybe you should read the chat message yourself, Ruben.
All right.
How I can add the timestamp to the output for the each received mirror.
Yeah, so I think that goes into basically the new feature with template outputs, because it's definitely for that kind of use case. So if I do something a little bit dumb here, so I'm just kind of getting a list of devices, then getting it again, just to kind of show this pipiness. You can actually then build with an output template. You can then reference the difference. So in, sorry, let's go request a URL or something like this. And let's do output and then a no time date. I think that should do it. No. But yeah, you should be able to add, probably doing something dumb here. You should be able to build it. I could probably provide afterwards, and because have caps lock on. But yeah, you can kind of combine, and with the output templates, yeah, something's not working. You can do this kind of additional kind of magic to kind of add, additional information to it, which is really nice. And I know Kubinian uses that a lot. He's built some very, very complex reports. So the idea was to basically just enrich the output with maybe additional information, like adding a timestamp. So, because there's definitely functions to do that. I'm just doing something ad hoc, so it's obviously not working. Because obviously I chose the wrong, but that will probably work.
And this is also working for the notification API, where you use it.
Yeah. So that works for everything.
Okay.
So it's obviously I chose a reserved word because I was being short. So for example, so time. So that's where like using the inbuilt like functions is kind of nice. See, now I've added, because I used the time helper. So this it's kind of like influence from underscore, those who do JavaScript, to use underscore dot. And then there's different functions that I provide to helpers to do, common actions. And getting date or date manipulation is one of them. And without any arguments, it just gets the now time. So that output, if you can use output template, that's for anything. So you could do your subscription, and then when you get the result, then you can add it in. And it doesn't have to be JSON output. You can also build kind of a text output if you want. But that is very, very flexible because it allows you to kind of combine the input with the output, and that goes inside the reporting and element. But worst case, you could kind of pipe it to JQ and let JQ do the insertion. But I kind of want to do as much in there because it's quite powerful having everything on one tool, to being it a little bit more portable.
Okay, cool. And then there's a last question, but I think I can answer that as well. Is it possible to add query to other than the C8y devices? I think this is an API limitation currently, right?
Yeah, exactly.
On the inventory, we have the query API.
Correct. Yeah. So there is basically on anything that supports it will have a generic, hey, I don't know what you need to do, so you know what to do, I'll let you do it, kind of mindset. So I usually have a few helpers, which basically are flags which get mapped to a query, like the inventory query API. But if I don't have flag there, you can always resort to the query and construct it yourself. That's fine. And for common things, like the has operator and stuff, like test me, I do that quite often because that's there's no way you could build that into a flag. Yeah.
Okay.
So maybe just to wrap up, I would really, really recommend if you want to kind of see the really, really nice features, because there's a lot I didn't cover, like caching. That's a huge one, which is really, really powerful and also doesn't send requests to the server. So that's also good. So if you go to the concepts page or like concept pages, you can also kind of see what the reason is behind all of these features, like even the activity log, caching, chaining, whatever, and even have a taste of the extensions. So I would encourage you to read go through here, look at the tutorials, the examples. I also try to do quite holistic examples. So here's one for the notifications too. I might even add the output template into there. So really use it. And if there's something missing, let me know and I can add it. I'm very happy to add more examples, like real life examples as well.
Perfect. That was very, very insightful, Ruben. Thank you very much again. Thank you everybody for attending the event. I'm looking forward to see you one of the next events. Have a nice day, guys.